Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and let's start for today's session. And as usual, I will go over our schedule because we have a weekly meetup, and then we, for 1.5 years, we kind of follow the book, A Short History of Chinese Philosophy. Through from the ancient time, 2,500 years ago. Right now, we are almost, I would say that the last section I will present about the westernizing, the process of westernizing. So we kind of like put it to the end of this book. And the next week, I will introduce another one after Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao. He is quite famous. His name is Lu Xun. Okay, and a lot of people, most of people probably heard about him. Most of people speak Chinese or learn Chinese probably heard about him. And I know he has also been introduced in the American college when you take the class like a modernist novel and modernist novelist, so he probably one of that. So next week we will talk about him and some of idea of anti-Confucianism. Okay, so up to this point, okay, or the schedule. So we will do two next week. And April 1st, I will take off. So that's April 4th, we will have no meeting. And April 8th, we will start, continue on Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5 and 6. So after that, I will put a history of Chinese philosophy on stop for about 2 to 3 months. And I have other 2 series I am planning to introduce. One is about Zhuangzi, the Taoist writing. I'm going to go through Feng Youlan's interpretation and the translation on Zhuangzi's 7 inner chapter based on Guo Xiang's interpretation. And Guo Xiang is so-called the Near Taoism, okay? So we will see different layer of interpretation from Feng Youlan point of view. And then we will go through the inner chapters, so-called inner chapters. They have the 7 chapters. So probably I will do 7 section on that. And also I will go through, recently I read a book from Professor Xia Zhiqing, okay, C.T. Xia. I find out his writing is very good. So he introduced 6 Chinese novels. Okay, so I will also introduce these 6 novels, which is the Prom in the Golden Vase, The Dream of Red Chamber, Romance of 3 Kingdoms, The Water Margin, and what's this? West to the Journey. Another one called Scholars. Okay, so these 6 novels, so I will mix with Feng Youlan's Zhuangzi interpretation, okay, for probably this process, and with other subjects, and Pin, Quang, and Bhagavad Gita mixed here. So we will probably will last for another 3 months. Then we will go back to the
Asian
history of Chinese philosophy. So that's the schedule we are going to do. And then before we go to today's subjects, is anyone have any question or anything? Yeah. So we will post, okay, after that. Okay. So let's go to today's subject, and then I put the 2 names on that because it's being mentioned in the reading, and then Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao. And these 2, Kang Youwei is the teacher, Liang Qichao is the student. Okay, and I put today's title, as the process of westernizing. Okay, so before today, whenever I talk about Chinese philosophy, there's only in-house philosophy. They have no idea of the Europe. Okay, so they have foreign concept of foreign country, which is Buddhism from India. But other than that, everything is in-house. They have no clue who is Socrates, who is George Washington. They have no clue of the European culture at all. They probably know some Muslim culture, but they never take serious on that. So today and the next week, the people, they heard about Western culture and they read some translation. So they have an idea. So today's part is going to talk about, they are deep in their mind, Confucian scholars, and how are they going to make sense of their Confucian philosophy. Okay, so I think that's the important, interesting we can look. And of course, we may not agree on their view, but that's interesting to look at how they think about Western culture and what's their response to that. So as usual, we will break up to 5 different sections. Number 1 is a little bit long, and which is kind of a review, for those who haven't know much about Neo-Confucianism, and most are the slides I pick up from the previous presentation last year, from all about the Neo-Confucianism. And thank you for some people has been attend almost weekly. And then if you find out Neo-Confucianism is too boring, I'm sorry about that, but that's a necessary study. Just like in Western philosophy, you need to read Thomas Aquinas, you need to read the scholastic writing, which is terrible, difficult, and boring. But that's a part of culture you have to read. But congratulations, we already kind of done with Neo-Confucianism. And then today we just provide a quick review. Then we will move forward and see what's going on in 17th, 18th, and the 19th century. Okay. So, and number 2, okay, so that's the first part we are going to talk about. And then the person we need to know, of course, is Zhu Xi. Okay, he lived on the 12th, 13th century. And no doubt about it, he is the most influential philosophers in East Asia. Okay, not only Chinese, I mean East Asia. So his influence started at 13th century in China, and the 14th century in Korea, and the 15th century is in Japan. So that's far-reach philosopher. And a lot of people hate him and disagree with him, and some people praise him, worship him, and that's another issue. But no doubt about it, he is a philosopher with subtle argument, clear thinking, wide knowledge, and voluminous literature output. He has a lot of writing, so no doubt about it, he qualified as a philosopher. Okay, so the school he has, okay, if you read in Chinese, it's simple. People will call Li Xue, Zhu Zi Xue, or Cheng Zhu Xue. Okay, that's all the same people. And in English translation, so if you read any paper or any document, please pay attention. They all mean the same thing. The school, sometimes they call School of Universal Principle. That's the name I prefer. But sometimes they call it the Li Xue. Okay, this one. Sometimes they call it the Cheng Zhu School, because Zhu is the Cheng is Cheng Yi. Okay, so the younger brother of 2 Chengs. Okay, so Cheng Zhu School. And sometimes they just call the School of Zhuzi. Okay, so they all means the same school. They talk about same thing, just different name. So after Zhu Xi, another important thing is Confucian canon. Other than analects, they start to put so-called 4 books together. analects, we know that's the Confucius words, okay, has always been considered the most important. But Mencius, okay, which was not that important before 12th century. And after that, we consider he is the second important text on Confucius teaching. And the Great Learning, I think last year, January, the first section I introduced is as to introduce this reading. There's a very short, about a few hundred, I think about 1,000 Chinese character, okay, so-called the Great Learning, and then Doctrine of the Mean. Okay, so Doctrine of the Mean also very short, probably 2,000-3,000 characters, and Analect is about 10,000 characters, and Mencius is much longer. I don't know how many words, but I will estimate about 20 to, no, much more, probably 50,000 characters. So we will, I think from time to time we read a few Mencius writing. So that's Zhu Xi's contribution. And another thing is after that, Chinese start to be very serious on the civil, so-called the civil examination, or sometimes you call it the royal examination. That's a national exam. So after that time, the government officials were being through series of tests, and the common people can work for the government. It's very different from other place. And in this sense, it's very advanced because we can avoid a lot of problem, and the talent can work for the government. But the downside is the test is based on 4 books. So make all the learned people, they only learn these 4 books. And then they, based on these 4 books, they only use Zhu Xi's interpretation. So that means, these 4 books become very important, after 12th century, and that means for the last 800, 900 years, these 4 books is dominate Chinese thinking. So a little bit about Zhu Xi's philosophy. According to Feng Youlan's writing, and which I agree, I think he make a good point to, because he writes this book basics for the Western. I think he taught in Princeton University. So he wrote this book to help Western students understand the Chinese philosophy. So he called him Platonic idealist. So if you know Plato, and then Plato famous talking about the word of form. Okay, so how do you know you see an apple? How do you know this is apple? Because you have ideal form, okay, in your mind or outside this world, they have idea, they have form of apple. So when you see a particular apple, you know, oh, that's an apple. So to Plato, if you go to his Republic, the allegory of cave, right? Everything we see just shadow, and the real thing is the form. So they have we live in the shadow world, and they have another world, is the world of form. That's Plato's idea. And I'm not going to say Zhu Xi has the same idea, but Zhu Xi, instead of using form, he's talking about universal principle. So that means he has, in Zhu Xi's view, they have another word called the word of the principle. Okay, so so it's fair to call Zhu Xi as a dualist scholar, a dualist philosopher, because they have this word and another word, which is the word of the universal principle. One way to make an example is if the people are barbarian and never know math, you don't know how to do the multiplication, right? But does the multiplication table exist or not? According to Zhu Xi's answer, now of course he didn't answer this question, but we can see in Zhu Xi's philosophy. Yes, the multiplication table still exists, even you don't practice it, right? Same as like gravity exists, even before the things, before Newton, they have the gravity. And in the same way, Zhu Xi will argue the principle of xiao, which means filial piety, it exists before human practice the filial piety, because that's the difference. That's his argument. So if you want to make this chart before, so Zhu Xi basically he is not an inventor, but he is a philosopher to combine everything together. We probably don't have to go all the detail, but basically he look at these words as a dualism word. One is the principle, universal principle word, and which is include human nature. And the other side is the material world. Okay, remember his dualism is different than Descartes' dualism. When Descartes talking about dualism, Descartes is talking about mind-body dualism. But when Zhu Xi, of course, he didn't use the term dualism, but his philosophy is about dualism, two words. So one word is universal principle, and another material word is about qi, about the physical body, about your heart mind. So that's the two sides of his philosophy. And the reason he is doing this is he wants to do the moral teaching, because all Confucius teaching is about moral, about the political, about the moral political. So we talk about the Greek learning, and then we will reintroduce this important text again. And if you remember, or if you are interested, they have like so-called 8 stages, from the investigating of things, extending knowledge, making your intention sincere, rectifying your heart mind, refine yourself, harmonizing your family to your state and to the world, like step-by-step improvement. So there's a 3, the important thing Zhu Xi tried to teach is, how do we know D, right? We need to know D, which is universal principle. You cannot just sit there and think about that. You need to investigation of things. So you have the startings, and then you know the principle. So the study of things doesn't produce the science advancement. In another way, the purpose of study things is not satisfy your curiosity or to improve human life. The study of things is to understand the universal principle and improve your knowledge. And when he means knowledge, is not the knowledge of gravity or the distance between Earth to Moon. No, this not this kind of knowledge. He means knowledge is about moral knowledge. So that's the philosophy he developed. Okay, so this kind of thinking has been dominant for last 800 years. And then I think Feng Youwei, in his book, he make an interest comment on Zhu Xi's philosophy. So I'm going to read this one on Feng. This one is I copy from Feng Youwei's writing. He said every system of philosophy is likely to be misunderstood and misused. And so is it with schools of Neo-Confucianism, right? So according to Zhu Xi, one must in principle start with the investigation of things in order to understand the eternal Li, and I call it the universal principle. But this principle, Zhu Xi himself do not strictly carry out. In the record of his saying, we see he did not certain observation on nature and the social phenomena, but most of his time was devoted to study of and comment on the classic, So this one is the important thing. Even Zhu Xi teach, okay, investigation of things, extension your knowledge, but he probably too much in the moral political thinking. So his effort, according to Feng Youwei, and which I agree is very true, he didn't spend time to study tree, bamboo, natural world or the social phenomena. He spent most of his time study the ancient book because he believed the universal principle exists outside this world. And how do you know outside this world? He looking at the ancient time. So that's one of his contributions because he put a lot of commentary on the ancient text. But unfortunately, this is not his philosophy, his teaching, because he even himself not follow his teaching. He turned out study the ancient text instead of study the natural world or social phenomena. So Feng Youwei continue to say he not only believes that there are eternally or universal principle, but also that the utterance of ancient sage are this internally. So basically, he will take the ancient sage like Confucius, Duke of Zhou, or any ancient sage king, their words considered as universal principle. So his system here in the element become authoritarianism and conservatism, and which become more and more apparent as tradition of the Chengdu school went on. And the fact that this school become the official state teaching did much to increase this tendency. So his teaching, in a way, is already have its conservative side, but plus Zhu Xi himself doesn't follow his own philosophy. He spent too much time and study the ancient text. Okay, so people start, and plus the national exam, or you call the civil examination, start to use Zhu Xi's commentary as standard text. So the situation, the entire country become more and more authoritarianism and the conservatism. Okay, so I think that's the big problem to that, and then all the people have become no choice, because if you want to work for government, only way is to start Zhu Xi, and then the test, so many people in China, if you want to get past the exam, you have to spend 10, 20 years to study. And after you spend 20 years to study one subject, you are not going to reject this subject. So actually, that's the problem, according to Feng Youwei. And personally, I mean, myself, have another complaint to Zhu Xi's philosophy. Please remember, that's just my opinion. I think Zhu Xi make a big mistake. He gives the moral sense to the universal principle. In my point of view, if there exists something like a form, okay, and like a Platonic form or ideal world, it should be moral neutral. It should not have the moral sense. So I think Zhu Xi gives this kind of ultimate principle a moral sense, too strong a moral sense, kind of similar to later Christian borrow Plato's idea and the forms and give this one to God, become the divine. But I think Zhu Xi probably worse than Christian, because you still can see divine or God is less moral, but in Chinese, the universal principle, I think, is too much moral sense, including how to treat your parents, how to be loyal to your country, everything become this kind of principle. So that's my personal complaint or criticism of Zhu Xi's philosophy. So through the history, okay, they have some people try to reject Zhu Xi's philosophy. I'm not going to the detail because we already introduced, but just please just remember, he's not only philosophy, but he dominates the most scholars thinking. The reason is the government, the national exam. So we talk about Wang Yangmin. He's the person who talk about, well, we call him monism instead of dualism, because he said there's no other principle of work. Okay, so he's in Ming Dynasty. Okay, and then he turned out to have the so-called philosophy of action, knowing and action together, but it's not, it survived, but not continued, because you still need the government support. You still need to test the people to let it spread out. So turn out it's not that popular. And another person I think I also introduced is Wang Fuzi, and his philosophy, he's another monster, but his philosophy is more based on the Qi. Okay, so basically we can call him a materialism. Okay, so that's his idea, and I think we spent also one section to talk about his philosophy. And then another one I plan to introduce, but I think we can do it next time. As a person is his name is Dai Zheng. Okay, so he kind of have also have a materialism thinking, and he kind of lead to the science development. Okay, and start to have the democratic thinking, but of course it's unsuccessful. Okay, in this way. So that's the review to the about 17th century about the thinking, and the basic, if you want to think about it, that's the dominate by the Neo-Confucianism thinking. And if you want to map to the Western philosophy, you can think about this period of time from Zhuxi to 17th century as the, you want to call it the Dark Age, or you want to call it scholasticism, or you want to call it Middle Age, whatever you want to call, basically is dominated by the Catholic thinking before the Reformation. Okay, so if you want to compare to the Western philosophy, that would be the similar situation. So this part is my review on the Neo-Confucianism. Okay, so I will stop here for a few minutes. If you have a question or comment or anything you want to talk about, that's the time. And after that, we done with Neo-Confucianism. Okay, so question, comment?
Jason, I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so my question is, all these schools that you mentioned, ending with the materialism, did they seem to manifest in Chinese society, including the government and the ruling people and common people, and not just in the academic circles, would you say?
No. They leave the book, okay, and they have the writing, and they are not very successful. And one thing you can mention, one thing is interesting, is about some materialism and monism thinking. I start to pay attention on that. They develop around the 1650, around or to 1700. And they check the history during that time. That's the Qing dynasty, which is not typical or traditional Chinese people. That's a Manchurian, okay, Children people from Northeast. So basically, the Chinese face the foreign invasion. So during that time, people start to review what's wrong with our philosophy. Okay, and if you can imagine during that time, before all the scholars, they all praise the king, okay, praise the emperor. But right now, have a foreign king coming. They start to think about democracy, okay, human rights. So I think that's the interesting part. Of course, it's not successful, but I noticed, this kind of thinking they start to develop. In a way, we praise their thinking, and they start developing some less collectivism, more individualism. But in a way, the background is the king is not our king anymore. Okay, so they started thinking about people. So that's another way to look at. And it's important for today's subject because as most people know, to the end of 18th century, okay, China faced another problem. That's the West Europeans invasion. Okay, so people start to have another review about the Confucianism. Okay, people start to think about what's wrong with me, right? So I think that's another thing happened. Joe, please.
So what does Zushi mean by essentially the idea of cultivating virtue? In the sense that, so I think of it in terms of like Stoicism, where you have the cardinal, virtues, and you're kind of managing yourself towards those virtues like justice, wisdom, courage, and justice, wisdom, courage, and I'm forgetting the fourth one right at the moment. That's kind of embarrassing.
Cultivation.
But anyway, what's that?
You mean the
temperance. I'm sorry, temperance would be the fourth one. So the bottom line is, so I was thinking like in terms of the cardinal virtues or these virtues in general, and you're essentially Zushi's trying to tell you that you have to cultivate virtue. Like, yes. What does that mean in practice, like in a practical way? So so you would practice charity in a way, if you're in some ways, like that would be a practical way of actually practicing justice, if in the Western kind of way of thinking. But what would it mean necessarily in Zushi's concept of the universal principle to cultivate virtue?
Okay, if I have to answer your question simply, okay, that's just follow the ancient teach, which is the Confucius teach. Okay, so if you want to find the four cardinal virtues, and then I don't know, I can come with four, but some important thing is xiao, which is filial piety, and they have another classic of xiao, which talking about how to practice xiao. Okay, they have the ren, which is the benevolence or humaneness. Okay, and it becomes less important because this kind of virtue being used for the ruler, not the ruled. Okay, so talk about yi, the righteousness with your friend. Okay, and later on being elevated to your country. Okay, you sacrifice yourself. Okay, so all this kind of thing. Okay, become a teaching. So you compare with the Stoicism, I think it's a very similar way of thinking, because another way most of people find out, and I also find out, it's also because I'm more interested in Western philosophy than Chinese philosophy. And I find out the interesting is in the Western philosophy, we kind of think about the entire philosophy, including three parts, right? Morality and epistemology and metaphysics. Probably that's the way we think about. But that's not the way of Chinese philosopher thinking about philosophy. They think about probably the ontology, which is the universal things, and another big part is moral cultivation. So, and another thing we call the realm of Qing, the realm of sin. Okay, so that's a difficult part. That means when you reach that level, how will it look like? Okay. So just like in the religious teaching, like mysticism, this part. So moral cultivation always the key in all philosophy, because you will see why Zushi's Platonic metaphysics will become so conservative, because the purpose of metaphysics is to support moral cultivation or to teach you. So turn out Zushi's teaching become most important, if you want to put one word, is get rid of human desire preserve the heavenly principle. So every desire, sex, food, money, everything, okay, that's not good because that's your desire. And you have to preserve the heavenly principle, which is a universal principle that include filial piety, loyal to your country, work for the people, all the good teaching. That's it. So that's the first. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
You did. Thank you. Thank you.
Nick, please.
Yeah, just want to add a comment here.
Please.
So in addition to the effort to resist the temptation, in order to be virtuous, I think there's another thought that the human nature may not be good to begin with. So there's the two different schools of thought in the ancient Confucianism. Why is that? We were born with basically virtuous nature. We're good to begin with, and then as we continue the life, we need to resist the temptation, etc., to continue to be good. But there's another school of thought which says that actually we born with a bad thing. It's similar to the idea of original sin, but not quite that. But we are not born as very virtuous to begin with. Therefore, we need to overcome that original bad nature to be virtuous, to be good. So I think there are two different kind of schools to begin with, and so but end up with the common teaching, common calling to continuously cultivate ourselves. So with that, I also have a question to Joe. Maybe in the Western thought, are there any thinking about the nature of people when we are born? Do the Greeks assume we are born good guys or bad guys, or doesn't matter?
Joe, do you want to briefly answer Nick's question?
That whether the Greeks say that we're born naturally good or bad. No, I can't honestly say that they do. I mean, I don't know the exact answer to the idea that, I mean, in Christian tradition, there's obviously that element of original sin, but I can't say whether the Greeks said we were inherently bad or something like and the idea of legalism, or like where you'd actually have to correct people or things. Well, I can't answer that.
Okay, thank you, Nick, for mentioning this one, and then we should not discuss this one for too long about this because that's just the side subject. And then I just want to thank you, Nick, to mention about the human nature was bad, which was 23,000 years ago, 2,300 years ago, Xunzi. I think a long time ago I mentioned this one, Xunzi and the Mencius, which has a debate on the human nature is good or bad. In Europe, probably more similar would be Thomas Hobbes or Rousseau, okay, the original society. And that's a nice, but to China during that time, doesn't matter Zhu Xi, Wang Yangmin, or anybody, I don't think anybody bring up the subject of human nature is bad because they all adapt to Mencius' idea. Human nature is good, and that's it. So, any other question? Brian or Penny, if you had something or no? No? Okay, so let's move on. Okay, we will have time for question, and then I will make this one more briefly. I show this chart many times. Okay, and I'm going to show again, but this one I'm going to only focus on Confucianism. Okay, so about 500 something BC, that's Confucius time. Okay, but Confucius is not the first Confucianism because before China already have long so-called Ru tradition. Confucius is just one scholar, let's say scholar or political figure to have this. Then 100 years later have Mencius, right? So about 100 BC, Dong Zhongshu in the Han Dynasty, he start to, I think we also talk about more on the mystical thinking, okay, so-called human heaven interaction, heaven-human interaction, this kind of thinking coming out. And then through the development of the time to the 12th century, we have the Zhu Xi, who is revised Confucianism. Okay, so the reason of the Zhu Xi revised Confucianism is because during this period of time, China has a lot of war and spread out foreign. When I say foreign, it's not European. I'm talking about from the Mongolian, from the nomadic tribes. Okay, so and then also have Indian Buddhism thinking coming. So Buddhism thinking bring with strong metaphysical thinking. So during this time, they find out they cannot just, Confucius just answer the question, what can I do when I'm in this world? But Confucius never answered the question, what's out there, outside this world? What's going on after my death? Okay, so they need to build the metaphysical foundation. That's why I have the Confucianism movement. And of course, Zhu Xi has been very successful, even have Wang Yangmin during the Ming Dynasty, about 15th century, try to bring a different idea, but which we shall call unsuccessful. And between Ming Dynasty and the Qing Dynasty, which is 17th century, Wang Fuzi, more materialist thinking based on Qi, also bring up the different idea, but it's not successful. So right now, in this section, we are going to talk about during this period of time. Let's fix the time around the 18th century. Okay, what does Chinese thinking? Okay, during this time. Okay, so I think Feng Youwei's book also call it back to the Han. Okay, movement. So that's the academia thinking during this time. Okay. And I have to put a few words about the Qing dynasty. Here's the Ming dynasty. Before Ming dynasty, that's the Yuan dynasty. Yuan is the Genghis Khan's grandson who eventually conquered China. So during that time, we should call it a foreign rule. So about 100 years. So Ming dynasty, they kick out the Mongolian and become the, should we call home rule, or we call it the Han people rule of its own country. And on the 1644, the Manchurian, okay, the northeast people, tribe, okay, based lower culture, let's put it this way, okay, invade China and eventually take over China. But the way they rule China is different than Mongolia. They just try very hard to do the Chinese localization. So these tribes or Manchurian or Nuqian people, they start to learn Chinese character, read Chinese classic. So they become Chinese, sometimes more Chinese than the traditional Chinese. So that's they are doing. So they built a very solid empire in the Qing dynasty. Okay. So today I'm going to take some short time to introduce the thinking during that time, so-called the back to the Han, and later on we talk about Kang Youwei as today's protagonist. So back to the Han, okay, basics, okay. In Chinese, have a very different name, sometimes called Qing Xue, or Qing Xue, because it's a Qing dynasty. Sometimes called Pu Xue, okay, that means original primary study. Sometimes called Han Xue, that means the Han dynasty. So that means they are going back to the ancient time. Okay, that means in the Han dynasty, which is about 100 BC. Okay, so they want to, instead of reject Zhu Xi's teaching, they want to jump back to before Zhu Xi's thinking. So that's they are doing. And it's easy to understand this kind of thinking. The reason is the ruler, the emperor are foreign. They very tight control Chinese thinking, and they will prefer Zhuxi's and the neo-Confucianism. So if you reject Confucianism, you may cause problem. So the most safe way to reject Zhuxi is go back to before Zhuxi. Then in this way, government would have a hard time to find the problem of you, right? Because Zhuxi also follow, this ancient teaching. I just make ancient teaching clear. So that's the academic, in the academia, they are thinking, the scholar, they start to focus on the ancient teaching. So in this way, they don't have the great contribution in philosophy because that's nothing new to do. But they really did a great contribution. One is philology. They start to learn or develop, study the evolution of the Chinese characters and its form, pronunciation and the meaning. So famous thing is at that time they start to make a book called the Dictionary of Kangxi. Kangxi is the name of the empire. And that dictionary is very good. People probably know every Tuesday evening, I'm working on the some ancient text translation. And the Dictionary of Kangxi is the one I constantly use for reference, even today, because they keep a good record of how does the words ancient, antique meaning. So I think that's very good contribution. Another one is they do the exegesis. They study the classic text, including the interpretation and the commentary. So in CK, you have something? Okay. So exegesis. So that's and also they do the textual correction. And I think that's all very important, at least to me, because today we are able to read a lot of Xunzi, which just Nick mentioned about the human nature is bad, and we also read the legalism teaching, Han Feizi. All these texts, include some school of names, Zhuangzi. The text, a lot of it has been lost. And then they spend a lot of time. This scholars spend a lot of time to correct it and to reorganize. So I believe the text we read, and I constantly use is C text. C text. And all these texts are, I believe that's the contribution from these scholars during this time. So make it simple. They probably don't have a great contribution on philosophy, but they help us to preserve the ancient text and make it clear. And then in this sense, I think their contribution is great, and we benefit from their effort up to date. So Qing dynasty started back to the Han movement, meaning the return to the commentary and the scholars of Han dynasty and written in the early classics. So yeah, I think that's the part I want to talk on this subject. And before I move to today's protagonist, Kang Youwei, so I will pause for question, comment during this period of time. And so far, I hope you got a clear idea on during the that's said 18th century thinking during that time. They carried heavy Confucianism, most likely Zhuxi's neo-Confucian tradition. And then they start to look at the ancient texts, which also important in the later time. So before we move to the end of 19th century, so I will stop here. And if you have any question, and I hope I make it clear you got the idea of, if you assume you are the college professor, okay, and during this period of time, and your thinking could be like this, right? You carry a very heavy Confucianism teaching, Neo-Confucian teaching, a lot of moral thinking, traditional, ancient sage, ancient words, and you also interested and also familiar with the Han Dynasty, the ancient texts. Okay. So this kind of person, if you were this person, you know, then we are ready to move on to the 19th century. Question, comment? Nick, please.
Yeah, just a brief comment.
Yeah, please.
This reminds me of the Soviet Union, in the sense that the Qing dynasty was a regime that tried very hard to control people's thinking, and therefore it was very, very dangerous to engage in any deep thinking about that has implication for the ongoing affairs, etc. And therefore, people were forced to engage in sort of esoteric effort that are safe from being interpreted as criticism of the current regime. So similar to, a lot of Russian mathematicians engage in, very in-depth research, fundamental math, and even chess playing during the Soviet time. It's a bit like that.
Trouble.
So I'm not sure whether this is a good phase of the progress for the Chinese thinking during that time or not.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, personally, I think that's no contribution in thinking, but in a way, because their effort, and today, with our 21st century people, we are able to retrieve a lot of ancient texts and with a lot of commentary, and their effort is wonderful. At least, let's put it this way, And I thank you for bringing up the Russia, because I have studied Chinese philosophy, and I also become very interested to study Russian history and the Russian literature. And the next week we will talk about Lu Xun, and we will compare with Nicholas Gogol's writing. So it's interesting because Russian also, that will be the next section we later on we talk about, because Russian has shared the same fate of the Chinese, because they share the glory ancient. I talk about not Soviet Union, I talk about Russian, okay, before Soviet Union. They share the wonderful tradition, but they also face the Western. To them is they're West. The West Europeans are going up, so they try to modernize their country during that time. So yeah, thank you, Nick. Any other comment? No question, no comment? Okay. Let's move on. So we talk about Kang Youwei. So let's move to the 19th century. Let's see the time. Okay, that's the 19th century. Okay, so I take this one most from the Wikipedia, which is correct, and it's I have to admit it's difficult because we need to know a lot of history background, and during this 100 years, the thing happened, events happen in China probably more than last 2,000 years. Okay, so the pack of historical events. So I have to remove a lot of historical events to make things clear. So please forgive me if you find out I missed something you think that's important. Okay, but I just had no way to cover everything, and then my purpose is bring up people's thinking, okay, during that time, and then That's what I have to do. So Kang Youwei, okay, he was born in, his last name is Kang, okay, and he was born in 1855 to 1927. Okay, so he lived through the 20th century. He was a prominent political thinker and a reformer in China of the late Qing dynasty. He was born in Foshan, Guangdong province. If you're familiar with Chinese geography, Foshan is on the south part of China, and today is a very important industrial city. I think I've been there. So, but anyway, Foshan, and then it's not far away from Hong Kong, okay, in the south part, okay. And so you will notice from now, okay, the people we introduced, they all the southern, okay, they all from the south. Okay. The reason is they know foreign, okay, they have the contact with European. He was sent by his family to study Confucian classics to pass the Chinese civil service exam. Okay, that's not unusual. Every family will do it, the same thing. Okay. However, as a teenager, he was dissatisfied with the scholastic system of his time, especially its emphasis on preparing for the 8-deck essays, right? So this part is a little bit unusual because it's kind of, you can see his radical rebellion part, right? And a little bit about 8-deck essay. Okay, we talk about after 12th, 13th century, the civil service exam all focus on 4 books. And then later on, it's not only the 4 books, only the 4 books with Zhu Xi's interpretation. Okay. And to the Qing dynasty, its situation gets more rigid because the writing style is 8-deck essay. So that means when you write, you have followed a certain format. Okay. So if you read, I will introduce the book, Chinese novel, The Dream of the Red Chamber, and you will see the rich family, aristocratic family, the kids at 10, 11, they start to learn how to write this 8-deck essay. So Kang Youwei disliked, he's not satisfied to spend time to doing this. Okay, even he's good at this, but he doesn't like it. So in 1879, he was 21 years old. Kang Youwei traveled to Hong Kong and was shocked by the possibility there, which started his interest in the Western culture and the thought. So most of the people at that time, they only live within their hometown. And then if you are a good tester, you will go to the capital, try to pass the highest test. But he has a chance to visit Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong since what time? 1841, because the Opium War. Okay, and Hong Kong become the British colony, right? So it's become British rule since 1841. So there has been under British hand for 40 years already. So Kang Youwei was shocked by the prosperity in Hong Kong. Okay. So when he was 24 years old, that's 1882, Kang Youwei went to Beijing to take the imperial examination. Okay, I think he failed on this time. Okay, so there's the 3 levels of test, right? At the beginning, you test in your hometown. Okay, that's so-called the 秀才. Okay, I will have a more detailed explanation next week. That's first level, and then you can pass the second on your province. Okay, after you pass for 3 years, then you pass the test on your province level, which you call 举人. At this level, you probably can get a local job, local officer job. And after you pass this one, then you can go to the capital city to do the royal exam, which is hosted by the emperor. After you pass this exam, then you can get the job as the central government officer. So all the way up to prime minister. So that's an important test. So he went to, when he was 24, he went to Beijing to have the imperial test. I think he failed this time and he tested the second time, okay? And when he was returning home, he stopped over Shanghai and bought many Western books there and started developing his ideology.
All right, punk.
This writing. So, so he went to Shanghai. Why Shanghai? Because also during the war, okay, I think that's the, I forget which war, but basically Shanghai during that time became a so-called international settlement. So it's also multi-nation ruled place. So it's outside of Chinese government or Qing government, Qing court. So he went to Shanghai, just like when he visited Hong Kong, he was shocked by the possibility. And when he went to Shanghai, he tried to buy the book. And I don't think he learned English or any foreign language by himself, but he must bought some translation. And then we will talk about translation later. And then he bought some translation because he probably very curious. So you can see the young Kang Youwei at 24 years old, well-trained, good Confucian scholar, student, and he start to question about the why foreign country can be so prosperity. And his interest, after he take the test, he went to Shanghai to buy the book from the, I believe it's a translation from the foreign, okay. So when he was 25, he went back to Canton, which is Guangdong province, his home province. He founded the Anti-Food Bonding Society, okay, over the south part of China. So food bonding is kind of the morbid culture, I call it. And during that time, you can see the woman should have a very small feet, and then when the girl grow up to the age 2 or 3, they start to bond a girl's feet, so the feet become like twisted and very small, and the man see that's the beautiful, sexy or something. So also associated with virtue, because you are willing to suffer. You can relate it to the Confucian teaching or Neo-Confucian Zhuxi's teaching. If you have a big foot as a woman, that means you cannot deal with the suffering. And that means you are indulge yourself. That means you are not a good virtue. So this kind of morbid culture is very popular during that time. And the Kang Youwei, you can see, as a 25 years old man, and he's still working on his civil examination. And then he already start to read the translated foreign book and try to do some social movement to remove this culture of food bonding culture. Okay, so when he was 37 years old, okay, and I remember he and his student, okay, they take the test together and both passed. Okay, so at 37 years old, China was defeated by Japan in the first Sino-Japanese War, and then that's they signed the treaty of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, and that's the treaty. The Taiwan become part of Japan. Okay, so so since then Taiwan is separate from China anymore. So that's the important treaty. And the Kang Youwei and his student Liang Qichao, I mentioned later. Okay, okay. And because they are doing the civil exam during that year, okay, they have 600 people. So look like Kang Youwei is pretty good to do the social movement. So he has the 600 civil people to sign the petition, so-called the scholars' petition to the throne. That probably in the history is the first time have this kind of civil petition, okay, this kind of movement during the time. And Chinese call 公 公车上书, right? That's a Chinese name. And I think the better way to translate to English is so-called the Scholar's Petition to the Throne. So basically, they want the Qing dynasty, the emperor, to revise, just like Japan, okay, to westernize, okay, to learn from foreign, because Chinese cannot do this way. So when he was 40, 1894, almost to the end of 19th century, Kang Youwei and his student Liang Qizhao will become the important participants to campaign to modernize China. And then we call this one called the 100 Days Reform. Okay, I just want to make the story short, because after they pass the exam, they are able to work for the central government. And then at that time, the emperor, the young emperor who is 27 years old, he start to try to reform the country. So they use Kang Youwei, which is 40 years old, and then to do the reformation. Okay, and so here I list the reformation they are doing. So basically, you can see they abolish the traditional examination. Okay, no more doing these 4 books, this kind of examination. So they start to establish the Beijing University as the place for science, liberal arts, Chinese classics, okay, for study. So you can imagine that time. No, before this time, for 2,000 years, nobody studied science. Science being considered as like a handyman's job. So if you want to be a scholar, nobody studies science. Okay, liberal arts, that's not important. Okay, so that's the first time they try to think about have the formal education about the science, about liberal art. And they also established agricultural schools for all apprentices, because nobody seriously studied this technology before. And then build the modern education system and start to teach mathematics, science, instead of focus mainly on the ancient texts. And encourage imperial family members to study abroad. And they change the government. Okay, that's important. They want to change from the absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy, which, you know, I don't need to explain that, but most Western Europe during that time already changed, because 1848 have a lot of revolution in Western Europe, and most of the surviving monarchy are constitutional monarchy. So that's the important part that he want to do it, and apply the principle of the capitalism to strengthen the economy, because now they start to learn the capitalism. So they want to modern China's military and use Western modern training drill method, not use the traditional method, and try to build the naval, okay, not just on the horseback. And then they also try to establish the trade school for manufacturing of silk, tea, everything. So you can see all start to do the public transportation, okay, doing the rail, they start to build the railroad, because during that time, American already have the coast-to-coast railroad, and then China never see a railroad. So he tried to start to doing this one. You can see, in a way, from this list, you can see how much behind of China in the end of 19th century. And number 2, you will see how aggressive for this 27 years old emperor and 40 years scholar that never had political experience. Remember, during that time, the person who in charge was Kangxi, the emperor's so-called the empress dowager. Okay, Cixi, his mother or stepmother, actually is his aunt. Okay, he was 63 years old. She has been control the government for over 27, over 20, probably 25 years. Okay, so entire China is on this old lady's hand. So during this time, her adopted son, okay, the emperor, okay, already 27. So that's time he tried to become the real emperor to in charge of government. And he started to do this reform. And you can see that's a necessary reform. Nobody doubted that that's necessary. But this kind of radical reform in two inexperienced people, 27 years old emperor, okay, and 40 years old no experience scholar, just read a lot of foreign book, translation book. They try to change entire China. You can see how difficult, I think we will know it's impossible, and we don't have to. I don't have to tell you the result. Of course, it's failed. That's why I call it 100 days reform, because we only survived 100 days. Okay. After that, the story is his mother, the Empress Dowager Cixi, back to the power, and the emperor being in content in jail, and then a lot of people got killed. Okay, and Kang Youwei escaped. Okay, so that's the later story. One thing I like to talk about is Kang Youwei's philosophy, because our main theme should be philosophy. So one important thing is so-called the Confucian religion movement. The reason is at the beginning, from all the foreigners, when I say foreigner, that's European, come to China, most of them are the Jesuit priest. So what Chinese know about the Western culture start from Christian, okay, Catholic. So they probably, that's my guess, they probably shocked by this kind of religion. So instead of worship foreign god, okay, what they can think about is probably Confucian, okay, Confucius. So Kang Youwei have a movement called the Confucian religion movement. But of course, he didn't put the Confucian as God, okay, but he just want to organize the Confucianism as a religion. So basically, in his Kang Youwei tried to do the removement, and then he also bring the ancient text, okay, 春秋, 礼记, and he threw. Remember, he is a great scholar, and we talk about when he not only a Confucian, he studied Confucian textbook. He also good at so-called back to the Han study. That means he spent a lot of time compile reading the ancient text. So he developed, of course, he didn't invent it, but through the ancient text, he find out there's the three age in the, we can call it as a philosophy of the history, just like Hegel, right? Hegel also talk about philosophy of history from the childhood, which is the East, and developed to Greek Roman, which is teenager, to the adult, and to the future. Okay, and that's the historical progressive movement. That's Hegel. Okay, Hegel's idea, and then Kang Youwei also, through the ancient text, he find out that the three age, okay, is the movement of history. So he started to talk about the age of decline and the disorder, okay, which is the Confucius time through long of Chinese history. And he believed at this moment, he called the age of approaching peace, because the Western culture start to move in, and which will bring Chinese culture to a highest level, which is the age of the great peace. So he started talking about these three ages, and he started to produce a lot of writing talking about the future utopia. I didn't read them, but I know some of the thing is very strange. For example, he talked about people will intermarriage, and so for a long time, and in the future, all people are all white, okay, and there's no different color, everyone are white because intermarriage, and they speak the same language, become the great unity. So that's very typical Confucius thinking, and then and he will extend this one to the entire world. So he believed that's the way. So that's my word. I think during later time, after the fail of 100 Days reform, Kang Youwei as a philosopher become a prophet. Okay, he start to sing, okay, this great future. All right. Remember, during this time, the Qing dynasty already gone. The revolution come out, and then it's no more Qing dynasty. It's new world. Okay, but he's still thinking this kind of the old, the age of decay and the disorder, and move to the age of approaching peace, and move to the age of great peace. So that's the last one. I think that's important. That's Feng Youlan's comment, and I think that's very good comment. He said what Kang Youwei was advocating was not the adoption of the new civilization of the West, but rather the realization of the ancient and the genuine teaching of Confucius. So that's Feng Youlan's comment about Kang Youwei. I think that's interesting, and so you can see how the people during that time thinking. And just back to Russia, right? Russian during the and probably the same time, they have the so-called Slavophile and Westernizer. Okay, so two kind of group of people. Slavophile, Westernizer think about Russia should move to the Western culture, Western thinking, and Slavophile kind of thinking about no. Our ancient tradition was great. We failed because we didn't do enough or didn't do the right way of ancient teaching. So Kang Youwei at beginning looked like he's a radical and try to revise, reform everything. But gradually, his reformation looked like it's a conservative movement looking to the back ancient teaching, and they say, yes, Confucius already told us that's the world's going to move on. And then that's his philosophy. So which will lead to our next that's the next subject. Okay, that's about more on the technical, on his so-called old text and the new text. So I will pause for minutes here if you have a common question about the Kang Youwei and during his time. CK, please.
Jason, do you know what is the reception of Kang Youwei today in China or in the Chinese?
I don't know. It's I'm going to talk about this one to the end. Just stay.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Yeah, that's an interesting subject, and there's a lot of bad thing about him. Personally, I read like when he was 60, people talk about he's corrupt because he traveled to Japan and tried. Because at that time the emperor is no more, but he still tried to bring the emperor back and try to collect the donation. And of course, I didn't know, but I can say that's a rumor. Said he just corrupted and used the money for himself, and then when he was 60, he kind of thinking about I still have a few servant, male and female servant as his concubine, and blah blah, like 60 years, and kind of force 16 years girl to marry him. All kind of rumor about him. Yeah. Nick, please.
Yeah, I just want to comment. The impact of his thought at his time. We may have different ideas of him today, but at his time when he was having this thought, because his famous person. A lot of people read him, look up him. So his this utopian thought of his has it had any impact on the current affair back then? Because the traumatic experience of this petition, or that, and reform failure, or that, had this thought of his had any tangible impact on the Chinese thinking or the society at the time?
Oh, yeah, I agree, no doubt about it. And I probably have to say the impact is positive, right? So, common question? Okay, so let's move on. I hope this one is not, I will not say boring, but I think that's important. Old text school and the new text school. Okay, so Kang is not here. Okay, too bad. So he probably know a lot. Old text school and the new text school. I think that's this kind of thing is you look at the time. Okay, that's the BCE. So we're talking about 2,000 years before. Okay, why I bring this one? Okay, because that's also important if you want to talk about Kang Youwei's thinking. Okay, during that time. Okay, so give the quick background about the old text school and the new text school. Okay, but the name is confusing. But remember, old text school, we have old text school first. We have a new text school first, then we have old text school. Okay, so don't get confused. So during the, let's say 100 BCE, that's the Han dynasty, just right after the Qing, not Qin, not Qing, is Qin, okay, Qin, who the first time unite China. And the emperor burned all the books, so the ancient books are lost. So the surviving scholars, they just recite what they remember about the Confucius teaching or the ancient texts. So people write it down with that times, so-called during the time, so-called the new text, because they write the text are written during that time. So this text, including all the ancient texts, that's so-called the new text school. Okay, so just they have a lot of things the scholar can debate for their lifetime, but we just make it simple. Okay, this new text, so-called new text school, two things important. They start to talk about heaven-human interaction. A lot of mystical thinking during this text. And the person, Confucius, has been viewed as a prophet. That's why Kang Youwei bring up the 3 ages, the idea, because Confucius kind of like know a lot of things and a lot of commentary on the Book of Changes. Okay, so that's Confucius, that's during that time. But about 50 years to 100 years later, they claim, they find out some old texts in Confucius' hometown. They find out a lot of ancient texts. Ancient, I mean, before Han Dynasty. That means about 200 BC and before. So that means in their time is already 250 years old text, which is written in a very old style character. So they translate this text, okay, and find out this text is different than the new text school, which was recited by the old scholar. So this one we call it the old text school. The old text school, if we want to say the difference, the major difference is less about mystical heaven-human interaction. It's more on talking about the sage king, the absolute monarchy. Okay, talk about what king need to do. And the Confucius in this this so-called old tech school is more, it's not a prophet. It's not like knowing everything. He kind of is just a moral person as a role model, okay, moral agent on that. So that's the major difference. And then the reason I bring this, I'm going to skip the next one because when we talk about the old text, we are talking about the 左传 and the, so this one just for your reference. So the reason I bring this one, the new text school and old text school, because it's not archaeological event. It's more than archaeological. It's and more than scholar debate, and more than ideological debate. The more actually has been used as political debate. That's why these two schools are very important. Okay, so so we can start from the 80. Huh? Just 1 minute. So sorry about this. So about 80 BCE, right? That's in the Han Dynasty. Okay, I think we Quang talked about this on the discourse of the sword and the iron. Okay, and we have the modernist and the reformist. They debate. Okay, the government policy. So the so-called the reformist, which is they are represent the new text school. So at that time, I call it big government and small government. So the reformist is a small government. Okay, so that's the starting to use of the new text school as a political tool to use in the government. In the 50 BCE, the old text school start to come out. Okay, the person called Yang Xiong and Liu Xin. Okay, they talk about the new text school. If you remember, the new text school is different. They are talking about the absolute monarchy, and they have the political purpose because during that time is the if you the history that time has a Prime Minister Wang Mang. Okay, he tried to seize the throne from the Han Emperor. So this school, the so-called old text school, actually is supporting Wang Mang. They use this ancient text to help Wang Mang to become the emperor. After that, through the 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years history, old text school has been supported by the government because if you look at the history, Chinese government during that time is more centralized and absolute monarchy. So the text is become the important one, okay, because that's the ancient text can support the government. So 1981, Kang Youwei, okay, he wrote a famous book called The Treaty on Forged Classic. He rejected the old text school. He said, the old text school is all forged, they're fake. He bring up a lot of evidence. So that's because Yang Xiong and Liu Xin, they want to support Wang Mang for Wang Mang the usurpation. So they forge this old text school. So and then of course, okay, Kang Youwei has his own purpose, right? Because he wants to promote his own philosophy, 3 ages, and constitutional monarchy. He wants to promote this idea. That's why he brings this one. So later on, another famous historian, Qian Mu, okay, I read his book as a textbook when I was in college, okay, a great scholar. 1929, Qian Mu, okay, he refuted Kang Youwei's argument. He said, okay, Kang Youwei's method is totally wrong, and blah, 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 blah. So, but let's go to scholar go to school, and we probably don't have to go detail on what's going on today. But that's the idea in the old text school and the new text school. during this period of time. So I'll stop here, and before I go to the last chapter to answer a lot of questions about the westernizing and during that time. So question and comment.
Jason,
Yeah.
just want to understand the purpose of this page, the one on the old and the new text, to the topic of today.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaway? Either or is the scholarly community accept Qianmu's conclusion on
I don't know
Kang's
about
utilitarian use of the research?
I don't know on this one, and
Okay.
I believe people still debate on this one. If you go to the National Taiwan University or Beijing University, go to the Chinese ancient Chinese department, probably still have a scholarly debate on these two schools. But the reason I put this one is two reasons. One is it's deep tied to Kang Youwei's philosophy. And number two is the book, Feng Youlan's Short History of the Chinese Philosophy, also mentioned this one. So I think I'd better bring up and make it a little bit clear. So, and that's the only purpose. Okay, let's move on, and then we probably will have more time to discuss on this one. So Yan Fu, I'm going to introduce this person, for two reasons. One is the book of Feng Youlan's the Short History of the Chinese Philosophy, mentioned about him. And he's the first one translated the basic English, because he was sent to England to study Navy. So he probably pretty good in English. That probably the first translation happened. And secondly, and in Tuesday, I start to work on the ancient text translation. So I kind of feel what he said, is important. So I just list some of the book he translated. He translated Thomas Huxley, translated Adam Smith, and he transferred Spencer, Herbert Spencer, and John Stuart Mill, and Logic. And I don't mind that he only translated that part, first half. It's not easy, because if you see this book, it's huge. That's a lot of so if he can translate half, that's already great job, because most people probably don't read even 1/3 of that. English reader. So it's not easy. And the special thing I like to talk about is he translates this one in the classic style. So the writing is in English. And I think he also translated Rousseau's writing and Montesquieu, but I believe he doesn't know French, so he probably translated from English translation. That's my guess. So he translated from the modern, because you can see all these writings are quite modern in the modern English. He translated the modern English to the classical style. Because during that time, the people, we will talk about this one later next week, about the vernacular Chinese. Vernacular Chinese is today's language people use, but the ancient texts all write in the classical style. So what he did is he translated the English philosophical writing into the ancient style Chinese. And to me, this part is not easy. And I read some of part just for fun. It's very interesting, because you just have to know both languages very well to do it. And I feel I'm doing similar to his job today. I read the ancient text, Confucius Analect, Dao De Jing, or right now I'm doing the Art of War in the classic style. And I need to become like translate to English, but basics I have to do two-step translation. So first I have to understand it, translate to the modern vernacular Chinese, and then convert to English, and make sure the second time translation is matched to the original meaning and the style. So that's the difficult process, but he just do a different way. He do it modern English to the classic Chinese. So that's why I want to talk about him, because I think he's important, okay, in this area. And quickly, I'm going to talk about Liang Qichao, who is the student of Kang Youwei, and he joined Kang Youwei to the Reformation at 1805, and the movement was defeated, and he fled to Japan and promoted the constitutional monarchy and organized political opposition to the dynasty. So that's his first movement, in the same page as his teacher. But he was, later on, he started to change. He is one of the pioneer Chinese journalism of his time. And Liang Qichao believed in the power of newspaper, especially can influence over government policy. So in his point of view, the newspaper as a journalism is not only keep the record of the history, it's also a means to shape the course of history. And that's his great contribution. And you can see his thinking is moving. So the last comment is from Feng Youlan's writing. He talked about Liang Qichao was both a traditional Confucian scholar and a reformist. Same as his teacher, he contributed to the reform in late Qing dynasty by writing various articles, interpreting non-Chinese idea of history and government with the intent of stimulating Chinese citizens. So he kind of tried to, the purpose is to stimulate Chinese citizens, just like Socrates talk about his get fly, right? To wake up people and to build a new China. In his writing, he argued that China should protect the ancient teaching of Confucianism, but also learn from the success of Western political life, not just Western technology. So you can see he's different from his teacher. Kang Youwei is thinking about revise Confucianism. And they say, okay, see, Confucianism is still doing the great thing, and the Western is part of this. And Liang Qichao start to move to a different direction. He, at the beginning, is the same as his teacher, but later on, he start to write the journalism, and he think, well, Confucianism is important, but Western are equivalently important, and a lot of things we need to learn from them. So you can see this change, and then politically, Liang Qichao also from beginning to support the constitutional monarchy to become a revolutionary, because after 1911, Qing dynasty has been overturned, and he started to support revolutionary. And then in the Chinese history, they have the so-called warlord government. He started to work with the warlord government, and later he also, period of time, he close to the communist. Okay, and later on he settled in Hong Kong, and he criticized his teacher a lot. So you can see, I think his famous word is this one. I think the Liang Qichao is talking about. He said, don't hesitate to use the self of today to make it hard for self of yesterday. So you can see his personality is keep changing, keep moving forward. When I look at yesterday, I was wrong. Okay, I change it. So that's the way of his thinking. And you can see he and his teacher, he quickly changed to the Western style dressing, the clothing, and his teacher even claimed he is a reformer. He still wear the ancient style. And then he become a critic, very critic to his teacher, so they break out. So that's a very famous writing from his teacher, and then I just make my own translation. Okay, he's Kang Youwei, okay, the teacher, write this 28 character to criticize his student, and without naming it, and people knows he's talking about his student. I think this point is very well, but it's very difficult to understand. So I try my best to translate. So the owl will eat its mother, and the mythological beast, Qing, okay, will eat its father. So that's according to Chinese mythology. Owl usually will eat its mother, and it's kind of beast called Qing will eat its father. Okay, so he's implied student kill teacher. So the headless giant called Xing Tian, okay, waved his hatchet while the tiger guarded the gate. He's describing another mythology talking about the headless giant. He talk about the turmoil in China. The disciple Feng bent his bow to shoot his master, the sharpshooter Yi. Yi is the best shooter in the Chinese history. And he has a disciple called Feng, and Feng learned the skill. First thing he do is try to shoot his teacher. So that's he's talking about. So he say, I'm sitting and watching the sunset with my streaming tears. So that's real describe what's the mood, okay, mental state of Kang Youwei, where he sees everything he did failed, and China not become better, and his student try to talk against him. So that's his mood. And the interesting part is Feng Youlan's comment. I think that's also good about Kang Youwei. Feng Youlan talk about this throughout the Kang Youwei's life. He was hated. He become, I think CK asked about question. What's the comment on that? I think Feng Youlan make a good comment. He said Kang Youwei's life, he was hated first by the conservatives because he was too radical during the Reformation, 100 days. And the later by the radical, hated by radical because he was too conservative. Because he has, and actually Kang Youwei has never changed. He always had his own principle. But because the time changed, so he was a radical person when he was in 20 to 40s. But in his late age, he became a conservative because the time moved. Only Liang Qichao, he kept changing, moving the time. So he kept ahead. So up to here, I want to introduce a book called, Chinese called Beijing Fayuan Si, Martyrs Shine. And I find out they have the English version sale in Amazon. I believe probably not a good sale, so the price is quite high, about $40. So I didn't buy. I read the Chinese version about 20 years ago, I think. I think that's a very good writing and written by Taiwanese a writer, Liao. A lot of people probably heard about him. I read about his writing a lot. And this book, Martyrs Shine, the story of reform movement in 1898 in China. It's not, he's a historian, but he history major from National Taiwan University. But he's, well, you should not call him a scholar, but he is a good writer, and his vernacular Chinese writing is very good. And this book, I strongly recommend to read if you can find it. And first, if you read it in Chinese, it's very easy to read. And it's a story. Okay, it's a story, so it's not all true, but it really depicts during that time. And the reason I recommend this book is there's a lot of philosophical components in this book. Okay, because the way he talk about is he has a lot of the historical. Oh, that's one important person he mentioned here. the main person is so-called Tan Shitong. During the 100-day reformation, and after it failed, the government tried to arrest people, okay, and will execute them. But a lot of foreign people tried to rescue these reformers. So during that time, they have the chance to escape. So Kang Youwei escaped because he's the head of the reformist. Liang Qichao also escaped too, because he's the youngest one. And that's 6 people, famous people got executed. One is famous is Tan Shitong. He has a good relationship with the foreign force, and his father also the important government officer. So he has a chance to escape, but he decided to stay and being executed. Okay, so the whole story is talking about him and the conversation between all these people. Of course, the conversation has no historical evidence. So Liao insert a lot of philosophical idea in this dialogue. So, for example, Tan Shitong will quote Socrates, why Socrates decided to die, even he has a chance to escape. So this kind of conversation. So I think that's a good book to read, and it's not, they have some a good philosophical thinking, and but not too academic. So it's easy to read one, and that's the way to understand during this period of time. So I will stop here, and then today I have a lot of contents to talk, and then I will pause here for about 10 minutes, and then have a question, and then any comment. Yeah, thank you everyone. Yeah, comment or
Jason, would you like to give a lecture on Lin Yutang?
Lin Yutang, yeah, that's very interesting. I have a few books about Lin Yutang, yes. But probably less on my interest, because Lin Yutang, he has less on philosophical, because my main interest is still on philosophy. So he probably has less on that. But it would be good to read his translation. Actually, his English is very good. And his book called Gay Genius. Okay, I don't know you, Fei, do you know the book Gay Genius?
I haven't read any of his books. I just started to research on him today.
Okay, Gay Genius is talking about Su Dongpo. Okay, he is talking. Okay. That's a good book. Okay, he did a lot of Su Dongpo's poetry translation during that book. It's a very good book. I haven't read that book yet. I read part of that, but when I read it, I will probably try to make a section on that. Yeah, thank you.
He wrote My Country and My People.
Yeah, he wrote it. I think he was in which college, Brown or Yale, I think. So, so he most of his writing is in English and later translated to Chinese. Yeah. CK and Joe. CK, please.
Yeah, I believe Kang Youwei appears to me to be the most ungracious of Confucian scholars, because Confucius.
Hold on, you say ungracious?
Yes, because you don't force your disciple or your followers to always agree with you. Confucius advocated 和而不同, 君子和而不同. You should be able to accept all kinds of opinions, even though they are different from yours, to be that of a distinguished gentleman.
Okay.
So Kang Youwei was not very gracious. Probably he was too political. I mean, Liang Qichao was political as well, but at least
they're all political, right?
Yes, but Liang Qichao didn't force his teacher to accept his views. So I don't know why Kang Youwei was crying. It just really a bad.
I think it's probably from the old man point of view. So he kind of he find out his idea has not been, I'm not saying I agree with him, and I say I can see why he's crying,
Sorry, can I ask for some clarification?
Yeah, please.
From CK, what do you mean by Kang Youwei forced his followers to agree on his views? He didn't put a bullet onto their heads, no? How do you force?
I know you are correct. He didn't do that, but the reason he cried, based on the poetry, was because Liang Qizhao evolved different ideas from Kang Youwei's. He's no longer following his teacher's views strictly. He has evolved his own understanding and his own views that was different, divergent from those of his former masters. So therefore, to write a poem like that, it's not a very gracious, because intellectuals change their point of view, as it's very common. If you don't, you have to understand that they are not children. They don't just follow a viewpoint from birth to death. People's ideas evolve, and Confucius himself acknowledged that. Gentlemen do not always agree with each other, but they agree to disagree, and hence that's a gentleman. So Kang Youwei wasn't behaving like a gentleman in that sense, because you have to accept that your disciple was once your disciple, but this disciple could have views of his own or her own over time that is different from yours, and you just have to accept that. That is part and parcel of life. Even if you are a political figure, people don't always follow your politics.
Yeah,
even if you're a Confucius.
Yeah, that's our comment to Kang Youwei, but that's up to everyone's.
Every cult leader would excommunicate or expel the members that don't agree with them.
I think that's fine. We will have, just like CK said, we all disagree on disagree. And we all agree on disagreement. So basically, people I even have a different comment, and then next week, be careful. Next week we talk about Lu Xun. I know somebody probably read Lu Xun. If you have read his other book, like Nahan, how to translate it? Call for the help or something. Okay. If you read the book, or you read this other Lu Xun's writing, like this, I'm going to post, ask you to read a very short story called The Madman's Diary, okay, which is probably will call it the very first Chinese modernist novel, okay, and then he himself also admit he learned from Nicholas Gogol's writing, The Madman's Diary. But I find out that one is more similar than Nicholas Gogol's another one called The Nose. Okay, so it's interesting, and it's very short. Please read it, and then we will talk about Lu Xun next week. And if you read other Lu Xun's writing, like Kong Yiji or Wandering, or The True Story of RQ, or Call to Arm, Nahan, okay, if either Chinese or English, please let me know. And if you're happy to share what you read, and please let me know, send a note to me, and I'm happy to have you have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes talking about what you read this one. I believe a lot of people read the book if you read Chinese. So we come to the end, and then you will see today topic will be more debatable, because these people start to have a different idea. And the next week I bring about is Lu Xun. He is totally just against Confucius teaching. So that kind of bring to the entire history of China, Chinese history of Chinese philosophy to. I probably will post there. I'm not saying end it, but I probably will go to different series and then restart it, okay, in a different way. So thank you. So if you any comment from today's session, question, how do you think about this one? I will put the stop recording here.